Let's drop the pretense. Halloween's history isn't just spooky, it's profoundly weird. We're talking about a holiday built on tripping out on broomsticks, carving demonic faces into turnips because hell rejected a guy, and desperate dating games involving cabbage. This isn't another ghost story. This is the unhinged, true story of how Halloween actually happened. 1. That iconic image of witches on brooms soaring against a full moon has absolutely nothing to do with defying gravity and everything to do with getting astronomically high on a hallucinogenic trip. The legend stems from a very real practice involving a potent concoction known as flying ointment. This wasn't magic, it was illicit pharmacology. Witches would brew a dangerous cocktail of psychoactive plants like belladonna, henbane, and mandrake into a thick paste. The most effective way to absorb these compounds was through mucous membranes, so they would apply the ointment to a staff or a broomstick and, well, straddle it. The resulting psychedelic experience was so intense that it induced vivid sensations of flying, levitation, and traveling to other realms. So they weren't actually airborne. They were sitting in a hut, completely blasted, having an out-of-body experience courtesy of some very creative botany. 2. Before the friendly, round pumpkin became the official mascot of Halloween, the original jack-o'-lanterns were carved from terrifying turnips, and they were the stuff of pure nightmares. Forget happy faces. The Irish and Scottish would take these gnarled, pale root vegetables and etch demonic, tormented expressions into them, placing a hot coal inside to make their grotesque features flicker in the dark. This wasn't just a fun craft project, it was a form of supernatural pest control. They were designed to scare away the wandering spirit of Stingy Jack, a legendary con man so despised that after being denied entry to heaven, he was also personally booted from hell by the devil. Cursed to roam the earth forever with only a burning coal inside a turnip to light his way, these horrifying lanterns were a clear message. Go haunt someone else's porch, Jack. 3. In the 19th century, Halloween morphed from a night of ancient terror into what was essentially the Victorian version of Tinder. It became one of the most important matchmaking events of the year, a rare opportunity for young singles to mingle and flirt in a society choked by rigid social rules. The entire holiday was re-engineered for romance. Parties were filled with games and fortune-telling rituals, all laser-focused on one thing: revealing the identity of your future spouse. So while the spooky, supernatural aesthetic remained, it was applied to a different kind of fear: the chilling terror of ending up a lonely spinster or bachelor. It was less about warding off demons and more about the equally scary prospect of navigating the 19th century dating scene. 4. If you think modern dating apps are a weird way to find a life partner, they have nothing on the Scottish tradition of predicting your future husband with a cabbage. On Halloween night, a young single woman would be blindfolded and sent stumbling into a vegetable garden. Her mission was to pull up the very first cabbage she could get her hands on. This wasn't for dinner. It was a full-blown analysis of her future man. A long, straight stalk meant he'd be tall and handsome. A short, gnarled one suggested, well, the opposite. The amount of dirt clinging to the root indicated his wealth, and get this, the actual taste of the dirt was said to reveal his personality. Imagine having to explain to your friends that you chose your husband because his cabbage root tasted dependable. 5. Another bizarre ritual from the Victorian dating playbook was the quest to find a soulmate's monogram in an apple peel. This game required immense concentration and a steady hand. A young woman had to carefully peel an apple, ensuring the skin came off in one single, unbroken strand. If she broke it, the magic was off. If successful, she would then swing the long peel around her head 3 times before letting it drop to the floor behind her. The assembled partygoers would then lean in and scrutinize the resulting shape. The letter it most closely resembled was believed to be the first initial of her one true love. It was a practice that required a huge amount of optimism and a very generous interpretation of what constitutes a letter versus just a random, squiggly pile of fruit trash. 6. Forget a simple dessert. At Victorian Halloween parties, you might be served a slice of the cake of doom, a baked good that could literally predict your future. This wasn't just a cake. It was a high-stakes culinary oracle. Hidden within the batter were several small trinkets, and what you found in your piece determined your destiny for the coming year. If you discovered a ring, it was a guarantee of marriage. If you found a coin, wealth was coming your way. But if you bit down on a thimble, it was a social death sentence, signifying that you were destined to be single forever. You can just imagine the sheer, nail-biting tension as everyone took their first bite, praying for a wedding ring and dreading the lonely click of a thimble against their teeth. 7. In old British folklore, Halloween night was considered a very busy time for the devil, who was apparently out doing his annual nut harvesting. Yes, Satan, the Prince of Darkness, was believed to spend his evening gathering hazelnuts. Because of this satanic association with nuts, they became a key tool for fortune-telling, especially for couples testing their bond. A pair would place 2 nuts on a fire grate, each representing one of them. If the nuts roasted peacefully side by side, it was a sign of a stable and happy union. But if they hissed, cracked, and violently popped away from each other, it was a terrible omen, predicting a future filled with arguments, infidelity, and an explosive breakup. It was the original, and far more dramatic, relationship compatibility test. 8. The very first reason people started dressing up for Halloween had absolutely nothing to do with looking cute or scoring a bag full of candy. It was a grim and desperate act of survival, a way to fool actual demons. The ancient Celts believed that on the night of Samhain, the barrier between the living and the dead dissolved, allowing all manner of malevolent spirits and supernatural creatures to roam the earth. To avoid being identified as a vulnerable human and subsequently possessed or dragged to the netherworld, people would disguise themselves in the most grotesque way possible. They'd wear terrifying masks carved from wood and cover themselves in the hides and heads of animals to blend in with the evil spirits, essentially adopting a strategy of supernatural camouflage to make it through the night. 9. That pleasant, crackling bonfire you gather around with friends to toast marshmallows has a name with a chillingly literal origin, because the original bonfires were exactly that: colossal fires fueled by actual bones. During the Celtic festival of Samhain, Druid priests would construct massive pyres and cast the bones of slaughtered cattle into the flames as part of a sacred ritual. This wasn't about warmth or light. It was a powerful act of purification and a way to send a message to the spirit world. The smoke billowing from the burning skeletons was believed to have protective and cleansing properties. So, the next time you're enjoying a cheerful bonfire, just remember that its name comes from a far more primal, visceral, and frankly, metal, ancient tradition of setting skeletons ablaze under the autumn sky. 10. Long before perfectly molded plastic masks of superheroes and movie monsters became available at every corner store, one of the most common and effective ways of disguising yourself for Halloween was by blackening your face with soot. In Ireland and Scotland, where the traditions of guising began, this was the ultimate low-budget costume. Kids and adults would simply scrape a handful of black soot from the inside of a chimney and smear it all over their faces. It was simple, it was free, and it was incredibly effective at making you completely unrecognizable to your neighbors as you went from house to house. This wasn't about looking scary or funny. It was about achieving total anonymity, transforming you into a shadowy, featureless creature of the night, ready for mischief. 11. While we now associate pumpkins with spooky carved faces, in the Victorian era, a pumpkin could also serve as a very creative party invitation. Instead of sending a letter or a card, it became a whimsical trend in some social circles to deliver a whole, uncarved pumpkin to a friend's doorstep. This wasn't a random act of gourd gifting. It was a clear and festive signal that you were invited to their Halloween party. It was a charming, almost secretive way of communicating, turning the pumpkin itself into a symbol not of fear, but of the upcoming social festivities. It represented a shift in the holiday's focus from ancient dread to a more lighthearted celebration of community, fun, and of course, finding a suitable marriage partner among the other guests. 12. If you thought the cabbage ritual was a strange way to find love, get ready for the mirror stare down with death, a truly terrifying Victorian divination game. On Halloween night, a young woman was supposed to take a candle and an apple and sit alone in a darkened room, staring intently into a mirror. The goal was to see the reflection of her future husband appear over her shoulder. But this came with a horrifying risk. If, instead of a handsome suitor, she saw the image of a skull, it was a deadly omen foretelling that she would die before she ever had the chance to marry. It was the ultimate romantic gamble, a high-stakes game of Bloody Mary where the prize was a husband, but the penalty was a terrifying glimpse of your own mortality. 13. One of the most bizarre and oddly considerate Halloween traditions comes from Germany, where families would make a point of hiding all their knives before going to bed. This wasn't done out of fear that the spirits would use the knives against them. Quite the opposite. It was done out of concern for the ghost's well-being. The belief was that the spirits of departed loved ones would return to visit their homes on Halloween night, and the family didn't want them to accidentally injure themselves by bumping into or tripping over a sharp object. It's a wonderfully weird mix of spooky and hospitable, acknowledging that your house is full of ghosts, but your primary concern is their safety. You'd think a being that can pass through walls wouldn't struggle with a kitchen utensil, but they weren't taking any chances. 14. The familiar tradition of trick-or-treat has its roots in a much older and more solemn practice known as souling, which involves singing for the dead in exchange for soul cakes. Centuries ago in Britain and Ireland, on All Souls' Day, poor people and children would go door to door, offering to say prayers for the souls of a family's deceased relatives who were believed to be stuck in purgatory. In return for these prayers, the household would give them soul cakes, small, round cakes, often spiced with nutmeg and cinnamon, sometimes with a cross marked on top. It was a direct transaction, spiritual services for a sweet treat. This established the fundamental door-to-door model of Halloween, but the currency was piety and remembrance, not the thinly veiled threat of a toilet-papered tree. 15. While many modern Halloween traditions focus on keeping spirits and ghouls out of the house, the ancient Celts were far more welcoming, to the point of literally setting a dinner plate for their ghosts. During the festival of Samhain, they believed the veil between worlds was so thin that the spirits of their ancestors would return home for the night. To show respect and welcome them back, families would set an extra place at the dinner table, complete with a full plate of food and a drink. It was an act of remembrance and hospitality, treating their departed relatives not as terrifying phantoms to be feared, but as honored guests returning for a family meal. It was a beautiful gesture that viewed the supernatural not as an invasion, but as a reunion. 16. That cute phrase your neighborhood kids chirp on your doorstep, trick or treat, didn't start out so innocent. In fact, the first time it appeared in print, it was presented as an outright threat. A 1927 newspaper article from Alberta, Canada, described how young geysers were terrorizing homeowners. It detailed the unspoken contract of the night. You either give them a treat, or they will perform a trick. The article makes it clear this wasn't a playful question, but a direct ultimatum. It was essentially a miniature shakedown, a form of festive extortion where candy and sweets were the price you paid for vandalism insurance. This marked a significant shift from the prayerful souling to the mischievous and often destructive version of Halloween that was about to take over America. 17. The modern, relatively harmless tradition of trick-or-treat was actually born out of desperation as a form of vandalism insurance. In the early 20th century, particularly during the Great Depression, Halloween in America had devolved into a night of widespread destructive pranks. It was known as Mischief Night, and it was a serious problem. Teenagers and young men would roam the streets, overturning cars, breaking windows, starting fires, and generally causing chaos. Frustrated communities and civic groups, unable to stop the vandalism, came up with a brilliant strategy: bribery. They began organizing official trick-or-treat events, encouraging kids to go door-to-door for sweets as a way to keep them occupied. The unspoken deal was simple. Homeowners gave kids candy as a preemptive bribe to prevent them from soaping their windows or setting their garbage cans on fire. 18. It's hard to imagine today, But in the 1920s and 30s, Halloween in some major American cities escalated from simple pranks into full-blown anarchy, with authorities virtually surrendering to mobs of destructive youths. This wasn't just a few kids throwing eggs. We're talking about thousands of teenagers coordinating citywide campaigns of chaos. Newspapers from the era report on gangs of young men roaming the streets, derailing streetcars, shattering hundreds of windows, starting massive bonfires in the middle of intersections, and even overturning automobiles. The police were often completely overwhelmed, forced to retreat, and simply try to contain the damage. In some cases, cities were effectively held hostage by this Halloween lawlessness, which eventually forced community leaders to domesticate the holiday by promoting organized parties and the candy-based bribery system we now call trick-or-treating. 19. While today's Halloween pranks might involve a bit of toilet paper in a tree, 19th century American pranksters had far more ambitious and labor-intensive goals, like completely moving a neighbor's barn. In rural communities, one of the most legendary and audacious Halloween tricks involved a group of young men silently descending on a farmer's property in the dead of night. They would painstakingly disassemble an entire outbuilding, often a privy or a small barn, piece by piece. Then, with incredible effort, they would reassemble it in a ridiculous and inconvenient location, like on top of the farmer's house or straddling a narrow country road. Waking up to find your outhouse on your roof was the ultimate sign that you had been pranked by a very dedicated and very strong group of mischievous neighbors. 20. The 1970s and early 80s saw the rise of a terrifying phenomenon known as the Halloween sadism panic, an urban legend that gripped America with irrational fear. The story, amplified by sensationalist media coverage, was that anonymous, evil neighbors were hiding razor blades and poison in Halloween candy to harm innocent children. Parents across the country were terrified, leading to hospitals offering free X-rays of candy bags and schools banning Halloween celebrations. The bizarre thing is, it was almost entirely a myth. Sociologists who studied the phenomenon found virtually no documented cases of strangers randomly poisoning trick-or-treaters. The panic was a classic example of mass hysteria, a social contagion fueled by fear of societal decay and the idea that danger lurked behind every smiling neighbor's door, forever changing the way people viewed the holiday. 21. The pervasive urban legend about strangers handing out poisoned candy is, for the most part, a complete myth. However, it tragically stems from a very real-life murder that created the template for this national panic. In 1974, a man in Texas named Ronald Clark O'Brien gave his 8-year-old son a pixie sticks laced with cyanide, killing him. O'Brien also gave poisoned candy to his daughter and 3 other children to make it look like the work of a random maniac. His motive was sickeningly simple. He had recently taken out a large life insurance policy on his children and was deep in debt. He was caught, convicted, and executed for his crime. This horrific, isolated incident of a father murdering his own son was twisted by media and public fear into the widespread myth that anonymous strangers were the real threat. 22. In the early 20th century, before modern safety standards, Halloween was a major fire hazard waiting to happen. The holiday was a perfect storm of flammable materials and open flames. Children's costumes were often homemade from highly combustible materials like paper, crepe paper, and cotton. Combine that with the universal tradition of placing lit candles inside jack-o'-lanterns, and you have a recipe for disaster. Newspapers from the era are filled with cautionary tales and reports of children's costumes catching fire, leading to severe burns and even death. It was such a common problem that civic groups and fire departments would issue annual warnings, pleading with parents to use flashlights instead of candles and to fireproof their kids' flimsy, flammable outfits. 23. During World War II, Halloween in the United States was effectively canceled, or at least put on a very long pause. The primary reason was sugar rationing. With sugar being a precious commodity needed for the war effort, the idea of doling out handfuls of candy to children was simply not feasible. The government's strict rationing system meant there was barely enough sugar for everyday use, let alone for a holiday centered on excessive sweets. As a result, the burgeoning tradition of trick-or-treating came to a screeching halt. The holiday didn't disappear entirely. People still had small parties and dressed up. But the door-to-door candy collection that was just starting to become a national pastime was unofficially suspended for the duration of the war. 24. After World War II, the unlikely savior of Halloween turned out to be the candy industry itself. With sugar rationing over, candy companies saw a golden, untapped opportunity. Before the war, most treats given out were homemade, cookies, nuts, or pieces of fruit. But now, candy manufacturers launched massive advertising campaigns to reposition Halloween as a candy-centric holiday. They heavily promoted the idea of giving out small, individually wrapped candies as the perfect, hygienic, and convenient treat. This marketing blitz was wildly successful, transforming the holiday from a community-based event with homemade goodies into a multi-billion-dollar commercial juggernaut, forever linking Halloween with the mass consumption of brand-name chocolate bars and sweets. 25. During the bleak years of the Great Depression, when money for luxuries like store-bought costumes was non-existent, American kids proved their resourcefulness by making masks out of the most common household items, including empty flour sacks. Families in the 1930s couldn't afford elaborate outfits, so creativity became a necessity. Children would take old paper grocery bags or the rough burlap sacks that once held flour and potatoes, cut out eye holes, and draw spooky, ghoulish, or funny faces on them with charcoal or paint. These simple, often unsettling masks became an iconic look for Depression-era trick-or-treaters. It was a perfect symbol of the time, a holiday of fantasy and escape, built from the scraps of everyday life, proving that you don't need money to create something genuinely creepy and memorable. 26. For a holiday so deeply intertwined with a single vegetable, the Great Pumpkin Shortage of 2011 was a legitimate crisis for Halloween enthusiasts. Unusually heavy rains and flooding, particularly in the northeastern United States, decimated pumpkin crops, leading to a severe shortage right before the peak season. News reports spread panic across the nation as families scrambled to find a decent gourd for carving. Prices skyrocketed, and many pumpkin patches were left with nothing but bare fields. The event served as a bizarre reminder of how dependent an entire cultural celebration had become on a single agricultural product. It was a moment when a weather pattern threatened to derail a beloved tradition, causing widespread anxiety over the potential for a jack-o'-lantern-less Halloween. 27. Long before we had EMF meters and ghost-hunting TV shows, people relied on a much simpler method to detect a supernatural presence: watching a candle flame. An old and widespread piece of folklore claimed that if you were sitting in a room on Halloween night and the flame of your candle suddenly sputtered and turned blue, it was an unmistakable sign that a ghost or spirit was in the room with you. This wasn't just a draft. The specific color change was considered definitive proof of a visitor from the other side. You can imagine the chilling effect this would have: a group of people huddled in a dimly lit room telling ghost stories, when suddenly the candle's warm orange glow shifts to an eerie, spectral blue, plunging everyone into a state of terrified silence. 28. In a twist of fate almost too perfect for fiction, the world's most legendary escape artist, Harry Houdini, died on Halloween night in 1926. While the official cause was a ruptured appendix, the circumstances were fittingly dramatic, stemming from a punch to the stomach he had not prepared for. Before his death, Houdini, a staunch debunker of spiritualists, promised his wife Bess that if it were possible to communicate from beyond the grave, he would find a way to send her a coded message. For 10 years after his death, Bess held a seance every Halloween, hoping to make contact with her late husband. She never received the message. The annual seance became a famous ritual, forever linking the master of escape with the one final lock he could never pick. 29. While trick-or-treaters had knocked on the White House door for years, the first person to truly bring the Halloween spirit inside was First Lady Mamie Eisenhower in 1958. She was the first to fully decorate the presidential residence for a Halloween party. Ditching the typically staid and formal decor, she transformed the White House into a haunted mansion, complete with skeletons hanging in the foyers, jack-o'-lanterns grinning from the tables, and even witches on broomsticks suspended from the chandeliers. The event was held for the children of the White House staff, creating a whimsical and spooky atmosphere that was a far cry from the usual political functions. It set a precedent that future First Ladies would follow, establishing the White House as a festive and occasionally spooky participant in the national celebration. 30. The Bogeyman, that terrifying, shapeless monster parents use to scare their children into behaving, may have its origins in a very real and frightening job. One theory suggests the word comes from the bugeymen of medieval England. These weren't monsters, they were ruthless tax collectors known for their cruelty and intimidation tactics, making them figures of genuine fear for the common person. An alternative theory links the name to Scottish boggarts, malevolent household spirits that cause things to go missing and milk to spoil. Whether he was an overly aggressive taxman or a mischievous ghoul, the bogeyman was born from a very real sense of anxiety and dread, a name given to the things that cause trouble in the dark, both literally and financially. 31. When the first European colonists arrived in America, they brought their folk traditions with them, but not everyone was a fan of Halloween. The holiday's first and most powerful haters in the New World were the Puritans of New England. With their strict, austere brand of Protestantism, they viewed Halloween and its associated festivals with extreme suspicion. They considered the rituals, the bonfires, the fortune-telling, and the costumes to be pagan at best and downright satanic at worst. They actively suppressed any such celebrations, effectively banning Halloween in their colonies. It took the later arrival of large waves of Irish and Scottish immigrants in the 19th century to reintroduce the holiday to America and begin its slow transformation into the mainstream celebration we know today. 32. While most people don't think about it, there's a fierce, long-standing rivalry over the title of Halloween Capital of the World. The city of Anoka, Minnesota, holds a strong claim, as it's credited with hosting one of the first citywide Halloween parades in 1920, specifically to curb youth vandalism. They officially hold the trademark for the title. However, every year, this claim is unofficially challenged by Salem, Massachusetts. Capitalizing on its dark history with the 1692 witch trials, Salem transforms into a Halloween mecca for the entire month of October, hosting a massive festival called Haunted Happenings that draws hundreds of thousands of tourists. While Anoka has the official paperwork, Salem's global reputation as the epicenter of all things witchy makes it the undisputed popular champion in this bizarre battle for Halloween supremacy. 33. In one of the weirdest intersections of pop culture and politics, Halloween has become a surprisingly accurate political barometer, especially during a presidential election year. For decades, analysts and journalists have noted a bizarrely consistent trend. The sales of Halloween masks depicting the presidential candidates often predict the election's outcome. The candidate whose mask sells the most almost always wins the election. This isn't scientific polling. It's a measure of public sentiment based on who people would rather dress up as for a night of fun or mockery. Whether it's a sign of popularity, notoriety, or simply which face is more fun to wear to a party, this mask poll has a shockingly good track record. It suggests that on some subconscious level, the American public decides who will lead the country based on who would make the better Halloween costume.